Good morning and welcome to session 2, day 2 of the MediWales Connects NHS Collaboration Conference. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome you back. And to this session in particular, this is one of the sessions I've been looking forward to the most for this week, where firstly, I get a bit of a break from chairing because in a moment I'm going to hand you over to Adele Cahill, who is the Assistant Director for Value-Based Healthcare at Aneurin Bevan University Health Board. And Adele and I have had a conversation about today's session, and I'm really looking forward to Adele's speakers and the topics that they're presenting. Before I hand over, I just wanted to say you can find a link to today's and the rest of the week's program in the chat while you're listening to the presentations in this session. Please do have a look at the rest of the program. You can also find it online at MediWales/Connects. If you'd like to engage with the panel during the session, then please do leave comments, messages in the chat or in the Q&A. You've got both myself and Isabel will be monitoring the chat during the session, and so if Adele is busy speaking, then we'll be able to put our hands up and relay any of your questions or comments that you'd like to make, either during or after the presentations are finished. So please do engage and also introduce yourselves. This is a collaboration event, and so you can use the chat to introduce yourself, introduce your organisation, put a web link in the chat, anything you like. Don't be shy, please do. It really does help the speakers to feel like they are speaking to a room full of experts, peers and observers, whereas it's quite challenging to do that when you're sitting at home presenting from a home office or bedroom. So please do participate in the chat. Also, please have a look at us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is at MW Connects. Please post comments, nice ones if you'd like to, and let us know how you feel the conference is going. Make any comments there, and we will try to respond. There's already quite a lot of activity going on the Twitter channel, so thank you for those of you who've been participating there. Thirdly, Meeting Mojo. That's our platform for partnering, our one-to-one virtual platform. If you've registered for this conference, then you will have been sent a partnering link. If you don't know where your link is, then please just ask Isabel and she will send you a new one. But that's your opportunity to post your profile, to have a look at who else is on the partnering platform, and to request one-to-one meetings, and they will be scheduled during the whole of this week so that you can have one-to-one meetings. So there's plenty going on. But for the time being, it's my job and my pleasure to hand over to Adele and to spend the next hour and a half discussing the challenge and opportunities of applying a value-based approach to procurement and commissioning. So Adele, if you're in the room, welcome.
Lovely, thanks Gwyn, and thanks very much for the introduction. So just to introduce you to this session today, I've got some great speakers and colleagues working with me on the panel today. So if I can introduce them first, just by name, and we'll bring them in as and when appropriate. So I've got Dr. Gareth Roberts, who is a consultant nephrologist, but works with me as the Assistant Medical Director for Value-Based Healthcare at Aneurin Bevan Health Board. Mr. Greg Bowen, who's one of our Assistant Finance Directors also at Aneurin Bevan, but he is one of the leads for costing and value in the organisation. Dr. Paul Best, who many of you will remember that was the Medical Director and was the start of our value-based healthcare journey at Aneurin Bevan, but has now moved on to become the Director of Clinical Strategy at Powys Teaching Health Board. And last but not least, Claire Salisbury, an old colleague of mine, who's now the Assistant Director of Procurement across NHS Wales Shared Services. So the format of the discussion today in the panel debate is that Claire is going to share with you a presentation on her views and some of the work that she's already done across NHS Wales. And then we're going to have a short discussion between ourselves as panellists before opening up to yourselves for any Q&A. So if we're happy to start, sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation from Claire Salisbury. Thanks, Claire.
Hi, can everybody see my screen?
Yeah, that's great, Claire.
Thank you very much. Okay, thanks very much for inviting me here this morning. I'm delighted to be able to present my thoughts and feelings around value-based procurement and the challenges and opportunities which it brings. So I'll just swiftly move on. So what do we think value-based procurement is? We think it offers an alternative, sustainable approach to reducing costs while improving patient care and maximising clinical engagement, applying the theory of value-based healthcare in practice. And this is a lot of the work that Dell and in particular and I and Bevan have done. And how do we bring that into practice within our everyday procurement lives? So this is what I'm trying to bring across today. In terms of the challenges, there's lots and lots of challenges. But when I say challenges, what I don't want to do is make that look like a blocker. And I think collectively, this is something which we can all work on. So for me, starting, the stakeholders is a bit of a challenge in that we are very, Wales is quite a big country, and we just need to make sure that we've got all our stakeholders engaged in this activity. So we talk about industry, clinicians, finance, our patient population, really key. Without our patients, we can't move this forward. Operational managers, and of course our SRO engagement and support, which is really key to move this agenda forward. In NHS Wales procurement, we have a wealth of very talented professionals, but resources is very difficult given some of the challenges we have as a procurement service in Wales with competing priorities such as COVID, the foundational economy, decarbonisation, and procurement can't do value-based procurement in isolation. We are really wedded to our clinical colleagues and our patient population to be able to do that. And that comes with experience and expertise, and it's not something we can just pick up and run with. I think within procurement services, as I say, there's lots of talent and value is in everything we do. However, this is a different way of thinking. This is a pathway change for us, and it's about engagement right at the beginning and having our staff being able to think and act differently in this environment. So experience is a key factor. The next point I just want to touch on is conflicting internal objectives. And this is quite interesting because we work very closely with our finance colleagues, and predominantly procurement has been seen as a cost reduction activity and making sure that cost and that service is delivered at the right price at the right time. And we need to change the way in which we think in our minds around the cost of the product and actually looking at the pathway. So working with our key financial colleagues is really key to try and help us to achieve this. And I think we're slowly getting there, which is fantastic news. And then on the trans of that is the conflicting external objectives. And for me, this is around Welsh Government, policy, health boards and trusts having different priorities and different agendas. And how can we bring them together for a common goal? And how can we learn from each other around if one health board is doing something very unique and inspiring, how do we scale that up across the rest of the health boards in Wales? So that's something which I'll touch on later, where we've managed to do that exact thing. And of course, procurement in general works to a legal framework, which is really, really important for us. And we work under the Public Procurement Regs 2015. It's very, very likely that they will change, and there's some really good innovative ways in which we can work, which are reviewed at the moment with the Green Paper and the procurement reform, which will certainly help procurement services in the way in which we procure our goods and services going forward. But that's a bit of a challenge because we have to be open, transparent and non-discriminatory to any competition within our marketplace. And then of course, we can't do anything in terms of value without our industry partners, who are key to making this happen. And are they ready for this challenge? That's a question I pose. Can they scale up as we grow as a country in terms of health board engagement, and can they help us with the funding issues which NHS Wales will have coming out of global pandemic, and look and act and feel differently. So that's key for me. Another one then is time. Procurement processes take a long time. The average is around 12 months with a EU procurement process. And do we have that time, and are we engaged early enough within the process? And I would suggest in some areas we're not. And the issue we have is we sometimes are being brought in too late, and then we have not given that pathway the time and the energy it needs. And the next point I'd like to make then is the appetite. Do we have the appetite? I think we do have the appetite in pockets. We're across NHS Wales in procurement. I do think we need to scale that up. And I'll go on to some of the opportunities later in respect of the appetite. And then can we change? Can we change with what's happening within the world? Can we change in terms of moving the procurement service forward and embedding the procurement principles within healthcare pathways, and have we got the right skills to do that? So that's just a flavour of some of the challenges where I see having a bit of a helicopter view of NHS Wales procurement going forward. Then I'm going to go on to the opportunities. Now, lots and lots of things have happened within procurement services over the last 12 months. It's been a huge success story for NHS Wales in terms of the COVID response, in terms of PPE, mass vaccination, and the testing. And what we have moved into is a national common operating model for change. And the reason we would like to do this is because we would like to bring our sourcing teams closer to our frontline teams, which in turn will make them more closer to our clinicians and understand how we have to change to be able to react to what's happening within our hospitals. We are trying and we are attempting to embed business as usual value-based procurement in everything we do. And if we think about value, we do it every single day with every single contract, but I feel we underreport. So for myself, we do need to start promoting what we're doing a lot more, because we think we're not doing value-based procurement because it's a brand, but we're actually doing it every day and we do not promote it as well as we should. And some of the examples will come flesh out later, but third sector commissioning and some of our sourcing colleagues have been heavily involved in that. But we cannot do it on our own, and we cannot, it's not there for everything. So we have to look at the maturity of the product. So if it's a product that's been in the market for a number of years, then yes, there's value, but is there a value-based procurement element of it? So I think innovation in the way which we work will dictate which products and services we take into this field. So I just mentioned around procurement, and I just do think it's not the answer. Procurement, it cannot be the answer in all of it. It's part of the puzzle. So as I say, clinicians and finance and stakeholders, patients, we need to be resourced to engage appropriately. I touched earlier around the procurement regulations innovation. I think this will make us more agile, and it will make it easier to review what we need to do in terms of those new procedures. So that's a really good attempt to do that. And then moving on to the value-based analysis, what we intend to do as part of the operating model is look at our category spend, look at where value is in those categories, and then mobilize the teams effectively to do that. And I don't think we've been there as a holistic service, but that's where we're aiming to get. So each team then becomes BAU. And the next one for me is really, really important. And the greater use of systems and data is key. Without the baseline data and the continuous collection of information and of data, we can't develop and improve. So what does good look like? And how are we capturing that baseline to be able to move forward into this area? How are we using industry to help us? And I think we've got a really key and good industry partners to try and help with that now. And then the next one is around decreasing cost of care. As I previously said, we tend to look at the marketplace around funding and cost of the product. And I think we need a new systems approach, not just focusing on the price of the project, and shift in the way we fund, moved away from silo budgets within our hospital settings, more to a holistic pathway costs, and then consistency of that reporting across Wales. And I think that's something which we are really at pace working towards. And this will come out in some of the examples which I'm going to share with you in a while. And that brings me on to the patient-centred procurement, which we'll touch around a couple of examples which are really key to this, and then national projects which we're able to evidence that it's for the benefit of the patient. And then the next one, again, all of this is linked, and utilising strengths of NHS Wales to drive value-based procurement is really key. And we've got some really good examples here. And one thing which we have certainly accelerated on is the Lightfoot contract within Cardiff and Vale, which is changing the way in which we're developing and supporting change through the use of data, which is absolutely key, into a single exclusive platform which provides huge and unique offerings around drilling down in real-time information and then putting the clinical challenge out there on the pathway, outcomes and quality frameworks. And what's great around this one is we are now scaling that up across Wales so the data can be linked. So that's a really good opportunity, which started in a local health board, but it's rapidly scaled across. And then that data now can be linked, which is absolutely key in the way which we serve and treat our patient population. It's also great for making sure that we make the right decisions and the right choices for our patients. And then around developing an approved benefit realisation framework beyond cost savings. So we're great at capturing our savings within NHS Wales procurement, but how do we develop a framework where we can log and react to what each health board are doing collectively or in isolation, and then scale that up? So that's something which we're looking to do. I touched upon promotion. I think we do a lot of it within shared services. It's just I don't think we promote it in the right areas. What I'm not saying is we are perfect at it. We just need to be able to evidence what we're doing and move that forward. So these are a couple of examples which I'd just like to share with you. And this is a really topical one at the moment in terms of what we're doing across Wales. Now, Len Richards in Cardiff and Vale is the SRO for this project. And he's working with all chief execs in Wales to ensure that this was adopted and supported across the NHS Wales. It's also supported by senior executives in Welsh Government. And it's a wholesale change in which the way in which we are treating our patients with the use of robotics. And what we're trying to do is be the first nationally coordinated programme worldwide, so of one nation on one platform, which will provide the value-based service and equity across our patient groups, optimising their health and their clinical outcomes. It should be a leading example of how we want to move our equipment and our services into this area in Wales. What we're not doing is buying robots, we're buying a partnership, and that partnership will work with us on the baseline data which we have, and then move that forward into a long-term relationship. And where we're at with that at the moment is our final tenders are going out next week. So this is a really good topical one, and this is a international journey. So at the moment, I think £5 billion has been spent on robotics. I think a couple of years' time that's going to reach 24 billion. So this is a really good area which we're accelerating in Wales. The next one is really aligned to this one as well. We've got the Genomics Next Generation sequencing panel, and we are looking how can we enable stratified medicine. As the population is growing and getting older, people are living longer. We need to make sure that we have an efficient service in this area. So what we're trying to do is support the delivery of stratified medicine, enhance the patient care, improve the speed of treatment and outcomes, whilst providing a sustainable and efficient service. This is really, really key, because I think in the past we would treat our cancer patients systemically with chemotherapy drugs. What this is doing is looking at the sequencing around the genes and the genetics of a makeup of an individual. And that stratified treatment will find the best treatment for that patient. And that outcome is huge. So we're working with our genetic partnership colleagues to try and enhance some of the working around the procurement of some of this. And this is a real example. And this has just been implemented in January 21. This is huge patient outcome benefits as well as experience. We can respond much quicker to the needs of the population within Wales. The decision making is instant because it comes off a panel, and we can look at what treatment they would need. It's improved access nationally, so it's not just in one health board. This is a national programme. Reduction in waiting times because the diagnostics are much quicker, and it's much more effective and efficient use of resources. And the key thing here is we have equality across our patient groups across Wales. So just because you live in Cardiff doesn't mean you get the best treatment. This is complete equality. So this is a really good news story for us and some of the work which we've been supporting across Wales. The next slide talks about respiratory health management, and we've been working with RIG for a number of years in some of their ways in which we're working. And this is absolutely key in what we're doing and how we're trying to improve with the use of applications on mobile phones. And this is really topical in the fact that COVID has just happened, and we have tried to use applications on phones and build technology to improve patient care and education. And what we've done is we've looked at the hospital guidelines, the COVID recovery app, COVID primary care guidelines, the long COVID guidelines, and Get Ready Wales for PPE instruction. What we've tried to do is look at how can we get this information within the public domain, which is controlled and educational, and actually moves to a much more a more agile care model and promote self-care in our community as well as the hospital settings. And you can see from this slide some of the work which the team have done within RIG, which is amazing. 180 videos delivered across 45 clinical leads, 5,500 registrations across 7 health boards. 45% of NHS Wales consultants are registered. So some really good stats in some of this work, and you know, we believe within procurement services we've got a role to play in trying to support that mindset from visiting hospital to a more of a agile working and using technology to move some of our services forward. And then the next slide is around something which we've working with my colleague who's on this panel, which is around non-surgical AV fistula wavelength. Now this is a really good example of where we are and where we need to be. So I'll explain what I mean by that. So this is a change of surgical procedure from a surgical setting to a radiology setting, and it's around reducing the time between insertion of the fistula and the time in which the patients are dialyzed. So that's a huge benefit in terms of the outcome for the patient. There is a huge reduction in scarring to the patient, but it's only suitable for a small cohort of patients that are not suitable for surgery for whatever reason. Unfortunately, the cost is double. However, we're on a journey with this one, and this is why I'm trying to show this as a tipping scale. So we're in a risk share agreement where we have a agreement with the supplier around the product claims. At the moment, the data is out of context within the Welsh landscape. And what we mean by that, we cannot use American data. So we need to try and look at the viability of this study, map the process and the pathway, and assess the comparative data against the 10 patients which we've identified. Once we have done that, we need to ensure that the pathway is costed fully, because the 100% of cost of this procedure compared to surgery would probably flush out around that pathway. Now that's something which we're working on at the moment. This is a Cardiff and Vale-led project at the moment, because we had a consultant who was willing to take the lead, who was a supportive directorate, and a finance team who was willing to give this an opportunity as a value-based procurement. So they were the good things we had to start this procurement off. What we're trying to do from there is then, if it's successful, is scale that up across Wales against all of our renal teams. This works for renal because the category is managed within one health board. So we have the direct links with the host health board, and we also got the links across all of Wales and the network. So this for me is a really good example of where we are now and where we'd like to take procurement services on a value-based procurement. And then the last slide I have is around myth busting. So there's lots of talk in the UK, across the globe, about the suitability of value-based procurement. I touched earlier around value-based procurement, around how do we use value-based procurement, and is value in everything we do? Absolutely, yes. So some of these pictures here is around ODEP. ODEP is the trauma and orthopedic guidelines around the data for that product. And we tend to use 10 years in NHS Wales, but that's already a given and that's already there. However, how do we use value-based procurement in those new initiatives and the new products, and how do we get them into that pre-entry market? And how can we use value-based procurement in industry to help us support that entry and work with our clinicians to do that? The next one on my list there is around the Vicryl sutures, antibacterial. And we have battled with this for a number of years to try and get this into our hospitals without limited success within some of the hospitals. The antibacterial will support the reduction of length in stay, the hospital-acquired infection, but it comes at a cost. How can we work with industry and our clinicians in working it with that pathway to look at the whole pathway cost so that the front end cost is not loaded for us and it becomes a no because of the cost issue? So we're looking at that across our pathways. We touched heavily on robotics and the surgical robots market. I think I mentioned some of those figures a bit earlier, and that's true value-based procurement and equity for us across NHS Wales. The one above is around skincare. If we were putting the right dressings on our patients, could we reduce the length of stay? What's the outcome? What's the performance of the product? And we've moved into that space, but how do we accelerate some of this thinking, and how are we working with our colleagues and in industry to make that happen? And the last one, which is very close to my heart, is breast implants. And for me, this is a personal story, and I think this is really key. And is a breast implant appropriate for everyone? Are we asking the patients? I would suggest not, from a personal experience. And my view on this is where are the patients and where the patient's voice? And this is something which I would really love to see more of within value-based procurement, and have lots of patient reps on our groups to have a voice, give their opinion, give their views on how they think we should be delivering the service and how we should be procuring, because I think that is absolutely key to success in everything we do. And I would suggest that sometimes we don't potentially make the right decisions because we're not asking the right questions. So I think that's come to the end of my presentation. I think I'm a couple of minutes to go, but thank you very much for listening.
That's lovely. Thanks, Claire. Thanks really for a very, very informative view on this concept. In particular, sharing some early part of your personal view and story there. And it's true, as Claire said earlier, there's many, many connotations of the word value, and in particular value-based procurement. And what I hope you saw from the presentation was some examples of large-scale projects, big, high value, versus some of the opportunities for some of the smaller projects around sutures and wound management, etc. This is really strange, actually, this concept of doing a presentation when you don't even know how many people or who's in the room. So we don't know whether people are shouting, scowling, smiling or whatever. So I hope it's going well. I thought it was a great story of what Claire shared. Claire's given you something to think about now, and hopefully during the panel discussion between some of my clinical and finance colleagues, instill some interest with you as an audience to ask us some further questions. So if you don't mind, I'm going to start by opening up with a question from Dr. Bess. I'm assuming he's with us. So whilst we get Dr. Bess to come on to screen, yeah. I can see, Claire, there is one question. Oh, there he is. There's one question that you might be able to answer really quickly. It's from Richard Brain at Evolve Robotics, asking, are the 10 online and where could they apply?
So the robotics one is midway through. So that one is already closed in terms of where we are with that, because we're in the middle of a tender process. But as and when we do tender these opportunities, we will put them on Sell to Wales. So I can certainly send you an email. If you'd like to email me directly, I can send you the link so to look for them. Lovely, great, thanks, Claire. Okay, thank you. So hi, Dr. Bess. Hi.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us. Hi. Claire talked a lot around some of the challenges in procurement in particular, but we know from your role now as the clinical lead of strategy and as your medical director lead previously, challenges around demand and capacity, and the pandemic hasn't done anything to help us with that. In fact, this exacerbated some of those challenges. How do you think industry can help us to deal with some of the wicked system-wide issues that we have facing Wales,
versus the opportunities to work at pathway level with individuals. So, you know, system level versus pathway level.
I think that's a fantastic question, Adele. I mean, I think industry is going to be a key player to renewal and recovery of the health service. I think post-COVID, health boards are actually starting to look forward to the future. And how are we going to sort of use the innovation agenda to improve capacity in our system, change what we do, how we do things, who does what. And I think increasingly we're looking to see how do we forge a new relationship with industry? How do we get a relationship which allows us to think differently about value across systems and in pathways? A great presentation by Claire resonated with me as a clinician, because actually from within the clinical pathways that I worked with, I could see, well, there's plenty of opportunities, aren't there, for new devices, rapid evaluation of digital systems to enable knowledge transfer to take place quickly across teams and to improve outcomes. And outcomes within a financial envelope.
Yeah.
But in a broader sense, I would say to you that health boards now currently are looking at their plans. And for me, the quintessential thing is how do we get innovation and procurement into health board plans? Now look forward to actually starting to forge new relationships and look at how systems can operate more efficiently in a value-based world. And I think that's a massive challenge to industry. It's a challenge to industry that if you look at some of the technologies out there now, at a systems level, they can seriously help the NHS scale up its capability. At the moment, you probably know that I work on the Scan for Safety project.
Yeah.
Can't say too much because it's at a crucial time, but actually Scan for Safety is not just a project about inventory management. It's about whole system quality and safety. And I think that a systems approach to some of this stuff, aided by industry, can help provide us with solutions.
Yeah, no, excellent. Thanks, Paul. I think, well, there's a challenge set for industry for those of you that are in the room today or listening to this virtual presentation. Claire's also given you the offer to knock the door of procurement services. So some nice early challenges out there for you. Thanks a lot for that, Paul. I mean, it is a challenge, isn't it, if we think about how does industry tackle system-wide issues, particularly when we've got the pandemic and we are trying to recover. So how do we use some of the technology that's out there to help us in that space? That's excellent. Thanks, Paul. I have a question for Claire now. So really, you know, as an industry partner or third sector coming to the table, where do they start the discussion with the likes of yourselves, with clinical teams and finance? Is there a clear roadmap for industry, procurement and clinical colleagues if they want to bring an idea, a problem or a challenge to the table?
So it's a difficult one, to be honest. So what we've done within NHS Wales, we've set up category teams, and we're organised as frontline teams to renew our contract and address and explore opportunities. But for me, there's a bit of a disconnect. And how does industry then get into those areas in a controlled manner without cold calling? And I think that's a challenge. Cardiff and Vale, I know, have changed their tact in how they deliver this. And it's actually run from the top, which is via Len Richards, our chief exec here, around CEO Connects. We call it CEO Connects. And we are inviting industry within a discrete group of executives to work with, share your ideas and how you can work with the NHS going forward, and in particular recovery, COVID recovery. One thing which I do think we need to do from a procurement point of view is be a bit bold, and we need to be telling industry what is our problem we're trying to fix. We don't tell industry what the problems are. If we were to do that and we could issue a PIN into the marketplace, a prior information notice, that the way we can engage the market with a series of workshops or meetings to come and talk to us, and they can bring the right people in and we can bring the right people in. And I think that's where I would like to see this sort of idea capture coming into NHS Wales, is having a bit more structure, a bit more control over it, so we can manage it. And then what we can do within our national category strategies, we can divert the ideas to the right teams to be able to mobilise some of that.
Yeah. It's interesting, Claire, you say that, because we know when myself, Paul and Dr. Gareth Roberts started some of this journey around value-based healthcare, we know it takes time. We've been at this for over 5 years now. And I mean, I guess in terms of a value-based approach, you showed us some great examples of how starting to change the culture, language and behaviour across NHS Wales. But that is going to take time to do it at scale. So that's really my next question is, you know, in a similar place to where we were around the concept of value-based healthcare, there's lots and lots of discussion and enthusiasm around value-based procurement as a concept. But how do we really get commitment to go for this, to go at scale and pace, to get widespread and, you know, innovative thinking around this area?
I think it can't be seen as an isolated problem for procurement, and I'm not suggesting anybody saying that, but what we need to do is make sure that we're planned in our approach and we've got the right people and the right clinicians, stakeholders, all of that in with us, because what we find is that sometimes procurement services are brought in way too late, and then we're trying to mop it up at the end, and that becomes just a general governance procurement, and we're not actually opening up that pathway and looking at the cost of it. I do think that there is a potential resource issue within NHS procurement at the moment in terms of where we are and where we want to be going because of the pandemic, but that's recoverable in terms of our new national operating model when that comes in. My view around this is we need to learn from the good practice in some of the health boards already. And one thing which we are not great at, because we think it's our business as usual, is promoting that good practice and all those concepts. And I think if we were to do that more, then we would probably see more traction in this area. But certainly, speaking from, you know, being the ex-head in Cardiff and Vale, we've done lots of stuff here. And do we promote outside of Cardiff enough? We think we do, but just listen to the debate today, I don't think we do that enough. But we do need to make sure that we have that support from our clinical colleagues and Welsh Government and the senior executives, because we can't do it alone, because it's a huge beast.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Can I bring Dr. Buss in there? Do you have a view on what?
Yes, I do, because I think that innovation in healthcare takes real effort. It takes a lot of energy, and the danger is always that in past, when change has been needed, we tend to sort of reproduce ourselves, but actually we need to transform. And I think I remember a Deloitte report many years ago on procurement. It was something about eating the procurement elephant or something. I think it was something like that anyway, because it's such a big agenda. But, you know, recovery requires new solutions, and it requires us to focus on quality of services and outcomes. And that resonates with the language, Adele, that you were talking about around value-based healthcare. And so I think at this moment, we've got a concatenation of issues. We want a solution. Industry can help provide that. Having a more slick approach to procurement and a more readily available system in terms of actually listening to what industry can offer is going to be essential, I think, for renewal. So I think now is the opportunity for us to expend some energy in the right direction and forge those relationships.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Paul. Can I bring Dr. Gareth Roberts and Greg Bowen in as well, please? I think it would be useful, Gareth, if you had a view around that. I mean, Claire talked around getting the support of clinical teams and execs across the organisation. So I just wondered, you know, if you had a view. I mean, I know one of the examples that Claire showed earlier was something that you've been heavily involved in. So how do procurement get clinical to support for some of these large projects?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of untapped potential there with clinicians, to be honest. You know, there's a lot of people out there with some really good innovative ideas, and there are clinicians on the ground who know what the actual problems are. You know, you were saying, what are the problems? There's a lot of clinicians who know what the problems are. I think some of them are a bit trapped, not knowing how to navigate the system and how to get those problems sorted, and a bit frustrated. I'm certain that there'll be a lot of my colleagues who don't even know what procurement is, let alone know who they are. They don't know what procurement is. They'll have a rough idea that there's a finance department. They probably will never meet an accountant until they're a clinical director. So, you know, there's a lot of work needed just on the raising awareness, education about cost and value in general. I think starting early on, you know, maybe undergrad is a bit early, but certainly at the postgraduate level, so you don't have to wait till you're a clinical director before ever getting involved in finance. What we found, you know, in the renal network where we worked with Claire and colleagues in procurement is when you do have clinicians in the room, and you get clinically driven procurement. You know, otherwise it's people telling procurement, go and procure something without really saying what the problem is or outlining the detail of the problem and, you know, what we're trying to fix. So people are interested, you know, when people understand it. We've had experience now in nephrology where people are thinking differently, clinicians are thinking differently, and, you know, they're going into conversations thinking, what do we want as an outcome from this product? Or even now we're going to industry saying, here's the problem we want to solve. We want more people taking control of their illness and treating themselves at home. What have you got that can help us? So, you know, it takes time to get enthusiasm and buy-in, but once you've got it, well, from my perspective, seems to work really well on the renal network side of things, working with procurement. And, you know, we're starting now to see some products coming through. And, you know, Claire showed one example, but we're slowly building up now. If that works, you know, what's the next thing to try and do it at scale?
Yeah, no, that's interesting, Gareth. I think, you know, what I'm hearing from both you, Claire and Paul earlier, is around, you know, it does take commitment, doesn't it? It takes energy, passion around believing in something, and that this isn't just, you know, it's not a quick win. This does take time, and that people really need to commit to some of this. So that's really useful. From a finance perspective, Greg, is there anything you want to comment on in terms of that last point?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Adele. I think to just go back to how Paul framed it a few minutes ago around, you know, recovery is going to require new solutions. And I think to go back to what Gareth said then, you know, certainly from a finance perspective, you know, what I see certainly from the, you know, the finance business partnering element of our structures is that, you know, we can potentially play a really key part in that, and providing that with, you know, potentially between what ideas have the clinicians got in terms of how we do things differently going forward, and maybe even, you know, work together with them to, you know, open the avenues and pathways to our procurement colleagues. And, you know, interested in there, Gareth saying, I think we've never met procurement or met an accountant. You know, work together as we move forward, you know, with one common goal and one common language, and the more successful we can potentially be as we come out of the COVID pandemic and, you know, well beyond into the future. Thank you.
Yeah, no, lovely. Thanks, Greg. I mean, I've got a question here, Gareth. I'm going to name you. It's come from Debbie Lowbach at MediWales, actually, saying we're often, sorry, it looks like I'm not looking at you, but I'm trying to read two screens, so apologies. We're often asked by industry how they can engage with the data that can help them to demonstrate the impact on patient outcomes, for example, PROMs and PREMs. So what do we think, how can industry engage with the data? What are some of the challenges that we're rehearsing ourselves, aren't we, in this space?
Yeah, so I think the problem is the lack of electronically recorded at scale outcome measures. So that is a real challenge at the moment, isn't it? I think we're lucky in nephrology to have a little bespoke database that captures a lot of the outcomes that we would want from contracts. But if you talk about system-wide PROMs collection, as you know, Adele, you know, it's been a real challenge to get that incorporated in a business as usual. So if we were going to make a big intervention and saying we expect this to improve the EQ5D scores, then right now I think a lot of health boards would struggle to do that in an automated fashion. And what you won't get buy-in for is clinicians having to do more and then to transcribe paper into an electronic database on someone's Excel sheet. So at scale projects need the IT to be able to do it in a seamless manner. I don't think we're there yet, certainly not in a lot of health boards. So there's work to be done there. it would probably rely on industry coming with a solution, but really that doesn't fit our agenda really of getting these things incorporated into business as usual across NHS Wales anyway. So it is a challenge.
Yeah, it's really interesting that, isn't it? Because there's this assumption and a concept that the NHS Wales needs to deliver all of its services itself. And this has always been a challenge with industry partners in the past, where funded posts, etc., can be provided by industry partners. And in particular, I think the IT world for us is really testing our capability across NHS Wales. I mean, we have NWIS as an organisation, absolutely. We know it's not big enough to deal with all of the IT challenges that we've got now. And in particular, I think there's something for the NHS in being bold and brave, as Claire has said, but to recognising that we're not the experts at everything, and that sometimes we do need to work with industry partners on areas that we wouldn't have previously. So Paul, do you have a view on that in terms of IT in particular, and where industry could help support us with organisations like NWIS?
I couldn't agree more. It reminds me of the Topol report. I mean, remember the Topol report talking about how we need to have the right expertise in the room to make the wise investment decisions. Yeah. And in relation to IT data collection, my concern is more about the fact that actually, if we just focus on amount of data and scale of data, we're missing a point here. We need to be measuring the things that really matter. Mm. And we also need to be prepared to have an incremental approach, an agile, develop agility in our system, which starts to sort of like free up entrepreneurship, linking clinicians into the agenda. So the procurement itself becomes an more agile machine. So I just think there's a kind of this transformational journey we're on. I personally think Wales is at the forefront, actually. I think there's so many things that we want to do, that we are seen to be doing. And now the next challenge for us is to sort of step up and develop that sense of agility. And with regards to IT, I mean, there are all sorts of things where we need to be thinking, I think, talking more about interoperability. Yeah. How do we sort of get kit and sort of systems that are interoperable? And when we do that, what are the measurements that really matter to clinicians and to patients, and to enable us to actually understand how we link in finance to the clinical outcomes? Because that's a fundamental part of the value equation, which is often forgotten. But again, in Wales, we've been at the forefront with the Finance Academy and starting to do the kind of work that is starting to get the sort of the clinical financial working arrangements into the right position. So I'm an optimist. And I think that at the moment, the right conversations are starting to happen around the data.
Yeah, no, excellent. Thanks, Paul. Gareth, yes.
Yeah, it was on the outcomes, actually, that, we talk lots about outcomes that matter. And we've had some experience of going to industry, haven't we, really? And sometimes people will come with the outcomes they think are important, and it doesn't necessarily match what the clinicians are saying. Actually, these are the outcomes that we want this product to deliver. That's the challenge. Sometimes there's a bit of tension between what industry might say the product does and what we actually want the product to deliver. And we have got to the point previously where, there's a risk sometimes of value becoming this kind of slogan, almost cliche, that people use just to get in the room or to put on a business case. And when you get right into the detail then of the contract and say, these are the outcomes that we want the risk share contract to be based on, we've seen people then kind of buckle under that pressure and think, oh, that does sound a bit too risky, and walk away at that point. This is industry now. This is not the NHS, this is industry. So there is a challenge there about, can you meet the outcomes that actually matter, as Paul was saying, from a patient citizen perspective, that the clinicians think matter to patients, and base the contracts on those, which might be slightly different to what was in the trial.
That's really interesting. I'm hoping, Gareth, somebody in the audience is going to give us a response to some of that. I'm hoping I'm going to pick up a question that we can ask around that challenge that you've just set to industry, really, around, why do they back away potentially when it gets a little bit tough? That's interesting. We'll come back to that, hopefully. Just for everybody as well, it is in the chat bar, Jonathan Morgan from the Life Sciences Hub has put some information up around how the work that we're doing with national leads and value-based healthcare are doing some work, and they put some contact details in there. So please take time to look at that after the session today. I've just got two other questions before I open this up much wider to the audience. So the first one I have is back to Gareth and Claire again, really. I mean, we've heard a lot now around some of the work that we've been doing, the enthusiasm and commitment from clinical teams. But you talk, Claire, around the legal frameworks, balancing time, the resources that you have and so on. How do we stop, you know, having been a procurement professional for many years, how do we stop hiding behind some of that the tendering doesn't allow us to do it, the time doesn't allow it, you know, and that you have to have really good planning and so on, which are all factors we need. But, you know, how can we take some risk ourselves as procurement professionals to enter into some of these arrangements?
I think that's really important to Darren, and it's a great point because, as you know, you and I have worked together for a number of years. We do take a bit of a risk, all within the rules, but that's the only way you're going to get things done. So my main thing is we have to be more flexible. The regulations are there to protect us, NHS Wales and our teams, but there are procedures there which we can use which are not restrictive. The competitive dialogue is a really good tool to get some innovation into our procurements and get what we want, the right outcomes for the tender or the contract. I mean, in terms of the contract, you know, we should be working with industry around how we build in those KPIs and those performance measures, and how do we change them as we're on the journey within the lifetime of the contract, because you can do that. And I think as procurement professionals, traditionally, we back away saying, well, that's the contract, we can't deviate. But we're not in that game anymore. We can do that as long as it's controlled and it's mutually agreed. You can change those KPIs and those monitoring. And that's something which we are much, much better at in pockets within NHS Wales procurement. So I would like to see that the switch from a restricted procedure where it doesn't fit this innovation and this value-based outcomes to a more competitive or innovation partnership procurement, because it's there for this reason. It's just we're not using it at pace.
Okay, no, that's excellent.
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, it is a real challenge, and you know, when you talk about the number of procurement professions across Wales, how you change the culture when many of us have been brought up in a traditional way around the legal frameworks and so on. To become, as Paul said, really, procurement is an agile enabler in this space, isn't it? Rather than be seen as a traditional blocker, because I think when procurement professionals are allowed to be free-spirited around some of this work, and actually we can create some brilliant, innovative.
Yeah, and I agree, and it's having the conviction, I guess, of our staff to be able to do that and dip their toe in that pond, as long as they're managing upwards and they're asking the right questions. I absolutely got no problem with them trying it, because it's the only way we're going to move forward and learn. As long as it's within that framework, I think it works.
No, it's really good. Thanks, Claire. And then talk a little bit more around finance now. So if I can get Greg to come back in. Hi, Greg. Thanks. It's a challenge that we face all the time, actually, as procurement professionals. But one of the things in particular that we always try, procurement seems to be rewarded for making savings off the bottom line every year. And one of the challenges I wanted to give was, Claire talked around suitors and dressings, and typically there's been a very traditional procurement, you know, where you've gone to the market, you've got a good value product for a decent price. But how, you know, if we're going to change our approach and tackle some of these big system-wide challenges that Paul referred to earlier, in parallel with some of the smaller pathway changes, how do we balance the investment required in order to realise the larger system benefits over a few years, rather than the in-year short-term gains?
Yeah, okay. So I think, first of all, I think it's important to think that in the bigger picture. I think Claire alluded to it in her presentation. You know, we've got a growing and ageing population. We've talked briefly around the impact of COVID during the session so far. We all know what we've lived through in the last 12 months, and you know that's had a devastating impact on things like unmet demand. And we're also a little bit uncertain, I guess, in terms of what the future demand is going to look like. And so to put that into context, into your question, you know, I guess perhaps there's no better time than now to really build and increase that momentum in terms of how we all think differently about this concept. And sort of like, changing that to our number one priority being to drive patient outcomes and experiences and taking that longer term view. And I think that, it's about being really clear, I think, in our proposals and our business cases around, what is the actual pound investment versus the expected outcome, comparing that to the value equation, and being clear on what the metrics are and what that impact is as well to the organisation as we move forward. And to have that joined up approach, I guess, Adele, between people such as myself and then our clinical and operational colleagues. And, we're doing everything all based on trying to drive that competitive advantage really, and make sure that we are ready for the future so that we can take advantage of any opportunities that comes our way to put the best solutions there in order to achieve, our organisational goals. So
I'm going to bring Paul in a second because he's been an evangelist around finance, to be fair, for many years. But before I do, can I another thing, Greg? I mean, when Claire and I were taught originally, God, many moons ago around procurement, we was like, you have 5 minutes to turn a clinician on when you go and talk to him, know your stuff, don't be fluffy, be all the rest of it. What's the narrative that excites finance colleagues?
That's just what you speak to. I think, for me, it's from a finance point of view, and to put today into context, really, it's around, if there are cost savings out there, it's how do we do that on the back of driving that patient outcome. And I think for me, certainly the language for me is all around, it's all about getting a common language, first of all. So it's all about how can we increase outcomes, how can we increase experiences. But I think one of the key terms and key narratives, and I'd be grateful for some thoughts on this, is that line around how do we make best use of our resources? Because I think if we can think of it like that and think about the resources that we've got, both in people, estate, budget, for example, is how do we make the best use of the resources that we've got to drive that patient outcome or outcomes and organisational goals. And again, it just comes back to being really clear on, balancing the pound signs with the non-financial metrics as well. So we've got that balance too, if you like. So that common goal and that unified approach.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks. Paul, can I bring you in here? Because I know you're a big supporter around, finance data, in finance properly. Do you have a view around all of this? How do we change the narrative around short-term versus long-term gains?
Yes, it's difficult, Adele, because what I could say to you is that 15 years ago in leadership positions, I just wouldn't have heard finance directors talking like Greg just now. And increasingly, it's just, wonderful to hear finance talking about issues related to clinical outcomes, medium to long term rather than all short term. And I've been working with a fantastic organisation, HFMA, for many years. An absolutely awesome organisation that's looking at integrated systems. And I think the kind of language around integration, around alternate offers, around new solutions, about working differently, increasingly resonates with finance. What they don't want is actually more of the same to get the same kind of outcomes. They are actually keen to sort of use money in an effective, efficient, resource-efficient way. And I just think a natural corollary of that is that you start to ask yourself, well, what does that mean for workforce? What does that mean for new roles? How can technology start to cross boundaries? And we haven't even come there, but actually one of the issues, I think public sector is a huge player when you talk about the sort of like the public sector as a whole, not just health, and actually social care, community and primary care and all these other kind of things. They offer a fantastic milieu for industry, healthcare, public sector to develop new kinds of relationships. And if the finance discussions are around outcomes, solutions, quality, and delivering a sort of a package Increasingly, we're going to see value at a local level. So that might be robotics in surgery, or it might be some issue around a pathway of care. But equally, there will be value discussions at scale with finance directors talking about how do we get really big wins in the medium to long term.
No, interesting, Paul. Does anybody else want to add anything to that point, or are we happy to, Gareth? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, really. I think, Greg is right. The need has never been greater to innovate. There's no better time than now to do things differently. But it may be that now is harder than ever to get pots of cash to invest. There's been no worse time, no better time for the need, but maybe no worse time to get new money to invest in stuff. But I think if we talk about system-wide changes, some of these things do need upfront investment, don't they? There's a bit of a tension again between immediate affordability and long-term value. If we talk about system-wide interventions, let's say there was a new device, I don't know anything about wearables, but let's pretend I do, that reduce the risk of falls in the community for frail people, then you're going to have to buy those, aren't you? And you reap the rewards in years to come. That's a challenge, not for industry really, but for the NHS. Some of these things are going to need upfront investment. How do you pick the ones that are going to give you the benefit? It's not a sweet shop where everyone can come in and get what they want, but there is a bit of a challenge there to invest in some things for the longer term benefits, and it's picking the ones that are going to give you the greatest benefit, I guess, based on outcomes. It's tricky.
Yeah, no, really interesting. Greg, based on what Gareth said there, saying it's not a sweet shop, what's your view around how do we come with some of those things?
Yeah, I think it's about that point, isn't it? And we talk about really, where are we going to get the largest outcome achievements, both in terms of volume and the risk, I guess, for that pound. And it's also a case as well of linking, the secondary benefits as well for what we do, potentially could create more capacity. So you've almost got like a double benefit then for what you decide to proceed with first, if you like. So obviously we haven't got any live examples of that, but it'll be interesting to see how all this unfolds now as we move forward. So yeah.
Okay, great, thanks. So before I just sum up then the session for us, any other panel members want to add any more points? Or Paul?
Could I just simply say that I think that so much of the language around innovation agenda now fits perfectly with the policy direction of NHS Wales. Healthier Wales, parliamentary review, all the kind of things that are saying we for a long time, even pre-COVID, we've been looking at doing things differently. I think Gareth's pertinent point about, we're now post-COVID, or we're coming out of the second wave. How we use language, behaviours, and new ways of working to start to look at the renewal recovery agenda, I think is absolutely important. But it does fit perfectly with what we were talking about before we knew of COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Well, just a couple of key messages. Sorry, was that a hand, Gad? Did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I'm just going to answer my own question really about industry and why people get nervous. And I think one of the reasons is we can talk here about, we'll base the contract on outcomes, because in a well-defined clinical trial, let's call it a drug A, improved quality of life. When you get into a room then and start talking about patients from, maybe a socio-economically deprived area, and we're going to prescribe this drug for heart failure to improve quality of life, then you start thinking of how you're going to draw up that contract, and you realize these people have heart failure, they also have COPD, they also have TIAs and strokes. How are we going to tease out actually that their quality of life improved because of the heart failure, or got worse because of the stroke or the COPD? So what sounds simple, just we'll improve EQ5D scores, you actually in the real world try and implement that into a contract, it gets really quite complicated. You won't know till you try it. I'm not saying don't try it, but it's more complex than it sounds, I think. And that's been my experience of when you get to the crunch, people get a bit wary because they think, well, how are we going to define which patients actually go into this. It's not a trial, it's the real world. So that's why I think it's more challenging than it sounds. I'm not saying it's not the right way forward. It is, because we're doing it.
Yeah.
But it's more complicated than it sounds.
Excellent. So I think I'm going to be handing to Glyn and the audience in a second, but a couple of things that I've heard from this today. So there's a little bit around who are procurement, Claire, and I think recognising that there's still more work to be done around training and promotion came up quite a lot around the really good work that's going on, but maybe we don't promote it as well. So I heard that today. I heard using procurement as an agile enabler. I think that's really true, and that everything, if we can get things to be clinically led, then we have proven that that can be successful in joint partnerships between finance, procurement and clinicians in this space. There is tension where industry say, as Gareth said, and I think he gave a great example there, where it sometimes can be extremely difficult to pinpoint that outcome that you can work with industry partners on. As you rightly say, Gareth, when patients have other comorbidities. But I think the challenge is what Gareth said, that I've summed up right in his words at the end, is there's no better time for us as the NHS with the need, and there's no worse time for us in terms of investment. But however, there's no better time for industry to invest to meet the needs of the NHS. I think I heard that nice and clearly, and that's probably the message I leave with you, Gwyn, and the audience really, for any questions or discussion on the panels. But just to say thank you very much to Claire Soulsby for putting the presentation together, and thank you to the rest of the panel members for joining us today for this debate. Thank you.
Yes, so I'd like to say a big thank you to all five of you. That was really insightful and really interesting to hear from your perspective where the challenges are and where the opportunities are. It was quite a positive picture that you're painting there of opportunities for health and for industry to work together to meet challenges. I'm just picking up on a couple of things you said there. I'm more than happy for people to post questions in the Q&A. We've had a few already, so if you'd like to post your questions, then now's the time. Don't go away from this session and think, oh, I wish I'd asked that question, because it's very rare that you get 5 experts of this quality in the room together. So use your opportunity. But while people are having a think, I think I picked up from Claire and from Gareth points about industry providing evidence, and I think industry, if I can condense 1 or 2 comments that we hear a lot, because MediWales is in a position where we are often aligning industry members to engage with the NHS appropriately, correctly, with programs and helping them to plug in a way that they can be considered for procurement. One of the questions will be, how do they know what evidence to prepare? Gareth, you mentioned that maybe sometimes the evidence is doesn't quite hit the goal, so to speak. And how can we help companies to prepare that evidence? Because sometimes it can be a very long process. If it's a formal trial or a formal study, then evidence gathering can be a long-term game. Claire, at one point you said we can't look at American data in relation to one of your case studies, and I was just wondering whether you could just elaborate on why that might be the case. And finally, I know that Health Technology Wales are in the room and that they play a role in the evaluation of data. So I just wanted to mention them, and maybe they'd like to come in the comments. So could you just elaborate a little on evidence and how you use it in a value-based procurement context?
Maybe if Gareth responds first, yeah?
Yeah. I think, you'd hope anyway, clinical colleagues are all well versed now in reading evidence and coming to their own conclusions. That's certainly been my experience just talking about nephrology. People sometimes ask challenging questions when industry come with some data, and industry put up a robust defense. What I'd say, what we're looking more so these days are not really trials in the evidence. We're more so saying, can you solve our problem? So, if that makes sense, We're not asking, does this drug do X? We're saying more so now to industry, this is the problem we want to solve. So you're asking, what evidence to bring. I'm saying build the evidence around proving you can solve the problem, if that makes sense. So, if our problem is too many people are having dialysis in hospital, we want to get people home. We want you to bring solutions that are going to get people home to dialysis at home. So tailor the evidence to show, that works. So I think more so as clinicians, we have to come up with the problems now, not necessarily come up with the solutions so much. Put that challenge out to industry. And I think that's where it'll work, I think, because a lot of the times, otherwise you get trapped in what the clinician thinks is the right answer, whereas industry might have much better answers, right, if that makes sense.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Gareth. I mean, and Claire, I guess the question I think that that Gwyn asked specifically there was around American data. That's really interesting, isn't it? Because is American data relevant when you're talking about a patient that lives in Blaenau Gwent, as an example? Is that going to be relevant? I'd be interested to see what your view is around that, Claire. Oh, and Gareth, I guess.
Yeah, it's probably more aligned to Gareth because it was a clinical comment which we had when we were going through this procurement with the lead vascular surgeon in Cardiff. But there was a reason for it. I've just actually tweeted my colleague to find out the answer, but I don't know whether Gareth, you had an update on that. Because
in particular with cost data, now we have a very different funding model for this. Is particularly renal again, but the way we fund and renal services is extremely different to how you might be reimbursed in America for the same procedure. So, if a cost-effectiveness model is based on the US funding model, that's probably not going to be relevant to us, and we'd have very different cost savings. And so, I'd say be aware of the local context and how things are funded, because someone might come to us in nephrology and say, this drug will save you money on readmissions, so you'll be cost neutral. Whereas actually they need to realize we don't get paid for admissions, or we don't save money. There's silos, aren't there, of money. So it's being aware really that even within Wales, that will be different to England. So be aware before you go in of how things are funded and reimbursed, because it might be extremely different to what your cost model is based on. So I think that's what happened with this particular one.
That's a really clear answer. Thank you very much for that, Gareth. And it really does explain why companies need to know what the structure of the organisation they're pitching to and tendering to is how costing is attributed and how reimbursement.
Yeah, and the commissioning arrangements.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that. A bit more of a general question. So this one might be to you and to you, Adele, and Paul. But So quite a lot of companies that we work with, they have a really positive experience when it comes to R&D collaboration with Welsh NHS and with organisations like Health and Care Research Wales or through the innovation and research leads in the health boards. But then they struggle to find the bridge between from that positive R&D collaboration that might result in co-creation of evidence that demonstrates a positive outcome, and then being able to sell products that meet that demand and relate to that evidence. Is there any positive news I can give them in that respect, in terms of the Welsh NHS as a whole procuring products that it's supported during the R&D phase?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. I'm sure Paul and Claire will have a view on it. But through my experience, and as I say, I've been a practitioner for a number of years now, this has always been procurement is an afterthought. So industry and other partners will do a lot of groundbreaking, spend time working with R&D teams, creating products or solutions, and then just think it can enter the market in NHS Wales. And as you rightly said, you heard Claire say earlier around some of the legal frameworks, they are there to be worked within. But if you enter procurement too late, you already have a product that's tested that you want to put into NHS Wales, they then go back to work within those legal frameworks, which actually does tie their hands if they've not been included up front. So my message, I guess, would be for industry, it may well be an R&D project, but make sure you've engaged procurement colleagues at the same time so they know what the pipeline looks like, they know what's, so potentially they can intervene at the right times. I don't know, Paul, if you have a view around some of that. I think he might have frozen. Oh, there you go.
Yes, I do. And fascinating, really, because I think when it gets to the heart of the issues that we're facing now, in terms of the sort of the challenge to the medical model and the traditional approach, and I think what we frame of how we look at innovation and how is.
Oh dear.
Seeing the. Can you hear me?
It's very patchy, Paul.
Paul, if I could just ask you to turn your camera off, and maybe, because what you've just said is vitally important for everybody to hear. So maybe if you turned your camera off, we might get a bit more bandwidth for your answer, because we were struggling to hear you.
Okay, can you still? Is that better?
That is, yes.
I think we're at a crucial point. I think we're at a crucial point in Wales where we're challenging the medical model in so many ways, in terms of the traditional way we value has different dimensions. It has a clinical dimension, the traditional one, but it also has the guise of functionality and experiential value, all these other things that really matter to individuals. At the mobile-based platform in Wales, to start to have a different kind of narrative with industry. And I think it's setting ourselves a challenge about how do we move from evaluation of a project, say in the R&D sphere, and then when it works, scale that up and spread it through Wales. Now, I think that is a real challenge for the NHS in Wales and its own agility. A piece of caveat in an Iron Bevan, why shouldn't it work equally well and be sort of like trials and spread across the rest of Wales more quickly? And I think we need to be able to give industry kind of confidence, outcome perspective, that either process outcomes, procedural outcomes, or eventual.
I think we're going to have to give up, Paul. I think we grasp the essence of your answer.
Yeah, I think we have another question actually from JM. Just maybe JM wants to give us a bit more information around who they are and where they've come from. But really, it's probably for you, Paul and Claire. So we have examples in Wales of how clinician-reported experience measures, oh, that's interesting, have been incorporated into a procurement discussion and contracts. That's interesting. Experience measures, isn't it? Clinician experience. Gareth?
To be honest, that's not a term I've really been familiar with. We're all very familiar with patient-reported experiences of a service. I've never been asked about clinician-reported experience. Are we talking maybe about a technology or a piece of kit and what clinicians think of it rather than how it performs? It's not something I'm familiar with, really. I don't know if Claire's heard of that.
Maybe can we ask JM to give us more? Is it an example or something that they're thinking of? I've got nothing there, so Gwyn, we can probably move on until I get a bit more.
Absolutely. So I've asked my questions, Adele, and thank you so much for your responses. I think Paul's gone out and come back in, so I think Paul is back in the room. I just want to say thank you very much for your contributions today, and obviously this is a dialogue that we have to keep having, and I think we're at the beginning of a journey of a paradigm change in terms of healthcare provision and how that affects procurement, and industry has its role to play in that. It's not the whole answer by any means, but industry does have to play a role as and when it's called upon. So Adele, I'll leave you to close the session, but thank you very much, and we'll be back with the next session, which is Adopt and Spread, which tends to carry the theme forward a little, and that'll be at 1 o'clock. So Adele, thank you very much. Paul, Claire, Gareth, and Greg, and thank you for your time today.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you, Gwyn. And then just in closing, just once again, thank everybody for joining me today and supporting this session. Hopefully you found it useful. I'm just looking, there's another question came up. It was Jonathan. So maybe we can take this just very, very quickly. So Jonathan, in the Life Sciences Hub, many products add value to services and health systems because of the better experience they offer clinicians. And I wonder how we gather this information as part of the value-based healthcare journey. It's not something we've ever really talked about in any detail. So maybe, Jonathan, is something that we can talk to clinical colleagues in conjunction with yourselves in the Life Sciences Hub to take forward. So thanks for that question. Okay, so I know we're... okay. So there's another one coming up, but we're not going to take it now. We're out of time, so I can respond to it separately. But again, just in closing, thank you all very much. Hopefully it's been informative. You do have all of our details on the MediWales site and also as part of Claire's presentation. If there's any further questions you think of afterwards, please do get in touch. And as Gwyn says, let's keep the dialogue going. So once again, thanks everybody for your support.